True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Today, again, we will be back on the Nancy Guthrie case. Everybody knows we are well over 6 month mark at this point, and I could not think of a better person to have on this show than Dale Lundberg. Again, Dale served as a homicide detective with the Dallas Police Department for about 10 years. He was decades with the department, also served in robbery, where they also handled kidnappings when they came up. Again, kidnappings are extremely rare, except in the case of parental kidnappings and drug doper cartel type kidnappings. So anyway, he also, as many of you know, you saw him on the First 48, the television show about different homicide investigations, and he was so good on that. So we're just blessed to have him here, and I'm looking forward to his insights today. The big question is, from a homicide detective's perspective, when you're at 6 months, what does that look like from behind the curtain? So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to get everybody caught up on the latest developments, right? Many of you know about them. We've discussed them, but we're just going to put a potpourri of all of them out there, and then we'll ask Dale about them one by one. All right, without further ado, here he comes. Hi, Dale.
Hi, Jen. Hi, True Crimers.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great.
Good. Love
My
to hear
puppy's
that.
doing well, so I'm happy.
Good. So Dale, by the way, for those of you who don't know, because I don't think we've discussed it, but Dale is a big dog lover. Everybody knows I am. I don't have Simba on my lap, but he's a great dog. And you know, I told Dale last night, I said dogs are better than people. He kind of chuckled. I don't know whether he agreed or not.
In many instances, yes.
All right. So, Dale, can you just give us from a big, more overview before we get into some of the nuts and bolts of some of the new developments? Can you just tell me, here you are behind the desk, you've got this case. Obviously, most people never have a case that is this big. You know, this is like an Idaho, a Gabby Petito, where it's just everywhere in the news. On all levels. Of course, it's died out of the news now, but what are you thinking at this point? You're at 6 months, and what's going on in your brain?
Well, one, don't get mad at me for saying this, but this murder is really no bigger than any other murder.
Mm-hmm.
If this was my case, I wouldn't be thinking that this is bigger than any of my other cases, because the taking of any life is equally bad. The only difference is that there is a lot of media focus on this, which creates its own complications in the investigation. But when you're looking at a case where it's 6 months old and you still haven't, at least publicly, announced that you have a suspect, you have to wonder, okay, why has 6 months gone and you still don't have a suspect? Is it because you don't have one? Is it because you have one but you don't have enough evidence to file the charges? Or is it that it's just a no leads case at that point, where you don't have any suspects developed and you're waiting on DNA to come back, or you're hoping for that magical phone call from, a mad girlfriend saying, oh, my boyfriend did it, or some other piece of information that just springs up out of nowhere.
So you said a couple of things there that I want to touch on. You said that media coverage can complicate a case. Bring us through what your thoughts were on that when you said that. How does it complicate?
Well, to begin with, you have anytime you begin a murder investigation, it's it's a big thing because you are trying to find out who killed somebody. You want to make society safe by getting a killer off the street to make sure that he doesn't kill again. You're also trying to bring closure to the victim's family by bringing them justice by arresting the person or persons who did this. So there's already a lot of pressure that you're putting on yourself to clear this case. But then when you have the eyes of the nation basically staring at you, that adds a different level of burden that you put on yourself because, oh, everything I do is being judged. And it is. Everybody's watching everything that you do, and they're complaining when you're not making progress or announcing progress as quickly as they would like. And sometimes that can influence what your supervisors tell you to do, what your supervisors do in spite of what you ask them to do or not to do. And it also brings, you have a lot of people who will call up with leads that aren't really leads just because they want to become involved in the case and maybe find something out. Or you may have people who may have come forward, but because of all the publicity with the case, they don't want their names getting out there as an informant or a witness for their own safety, so they don't come forward. That's why when I was, when some of my cases were on the first 48, I always wondered how many witnesses haven't come forward because they don't want to be on TV. They don't want their name to get out as a witness. And how many people are coming forward to talk to me, not because they have real information, but are just complicating the matters by acting like they do, hoping that they can get on TV. Did I
So,
say that right?
yes, made a lot of sense to me. So when you talked about the first 48, it's a cliche, but I want to know from your eyes, from a homicide detective's eyes, how crucial is the first 48? Is that just a cliche, or do you believe in it?
There's some truth to it. The vast majority of my cases were not solved within the first 48 hours. But of the cases of mine that were cleared, within the first 48 hours, I had the evidence or witnesses that I was able to use to eventually clear the case. That's why when you get called in or go out on a case, it's not uncommon to be up 24 hours, 38 hours straight working on a case because you know that the information that's in people's minds is just as fresh as it's ever going to be. And that's the time that people are most likely who have real knowledge of the case to come forward with the information. And so you want to get everything in motion that you can so that you can identify every possible witness so you can start, getting your warrants and your subpoenas and getting all of them out and served as quickly as possible so that you can have all of the information that you need to eventually clear the case.
I think that's a good explanation of it. Like it's such a critical time frame. I would even say the first 24, but first 24 to 48 is so critical. But it's not like it's going to be solved in that time frame. It's just you're getting the major pieces of the puzzle to put it together over the time. Just because everything gets slowed down when you're talking about the court system.
Yes, and a lot of people. Yeah, I have an uncle who, when I first became a homicide detective, said, "Oh, isn't it a lot like, chess where you got to plan out your moves and try to anticipate what the bad guy is going to do. And it's like, no, it's not like that at all. It's more like playing connect the dots. But the hard part is most of the dots you need to connect are hidden. And then when you identify a dot that you need to create the picture of the suspect, a lot of the dots say, okay, I'm not a dot. Okay, now I am a dot, but I'm not the dot that you think I am. and it's really much more like that than anything else.
Yeah, that is such a perfect analogy because you're not really interplaying with the suspect unless you're in some sort of crime drama on Hulu, right?
Yeah.
Reality of it all is that
Yes.
everything's done and completed, and there's not this interplay back and forth with black and white chess pieces, or it's nothing like that. It's, can you figure out the dots, and can you get the dots exposed, and are they the right dots? So I
And
love
get the dots to admit which dot they really are.
that's right. Oh, that's good. Okay. So a couple of more questions, again, based on that first statement you said. When you when you have a case here at 6 months and seemingly, at least to the public, no suspects, nothing's happening. I mean, we all know that if something were happening, judging by how they reacted with the first two characters, that they developed probable cause against, at least to do search warrants of their vehicles, search warrants of their residence, and then had enough reasonable suspicion to detain. They never arrested either of them or took them in, but they certainly had reasonable suspicion. We saw SWAT, HRT was deployed from Virginia. I mean, it was a huge Cecil B. DeMille. So my point is that if and when they get somebody, we're going to know about it. It's not going to be hidden. Plus, all these lepers that have come forward that are quote unquote on the inside of the investigation, that are all too happy to try to spoil the investigation due to their hate of nanos, seemingly. But this is my big question. Boy, I had a lot of scuds in there. But this is my question for you. Because of the mistakes that were made, the crime scene errors, 4 different crime scene searches, the mat not taken, the shrubbery not taken, the over and over again searches just for property that we were able to see, the lack of grid searching that occurred. In other words, a grid search may have occurred, but all the search we see on film is just people sort of intermittently searching that are from the FBI and from the locals. All the repeated neighborhoods, what we call canvases, that were done over and over and over again instead of having some script. Normally, right, when you first go out, yes, that's going to be more ad hoc. But after that, at least in the Bureau, what we did was we created something that everybody that's going to get talked to, these are all the questions, so that everybody knows what's been asked, what hasn't been asked, and you have the think tank behind those questions. My question is, with all these mistakes, and there's been many more than that, how do you think that has impacted this?
Well, it's impacted it a couple of different ways. First is because they didn't collect some of the evidence that I think that they should have, they may have lost their ability to get DNA evidence that could have led them to a suspect or confirm the identity of a suspect once he's or she's been apprehended. And I'm mostly talking about the mat. You have somebody with a flashlight in his mouth, possibly drooling all over the place. There's, a strong likelihood that or a possibility that you could have DNA on that floor mat that was never collected. But then if you do get a suspect identified and you have enough evidence to bring it to trial, you run into the issues that the defense attorney is going to raise, because he's going to point out all of the errors that were committed in the investigation of the case? How can the jury be sure beyond a reasonable doubt that the person that you've named as a suspect is truly the suspect because you have all of these other errors that you've committed in your investigation? So it brings up, the validity of your investigation when you do identify a suspect. And it doesn't mean that you'll never be able to get a conviction, but you've got an extra hill to climb to get over all of the errors that were committed early on in the investigation. And you have to convince a jury that in spite of these errors that were committed early on in the investigation, this evidence shows that we truly have the right guy. But you've given, a big hammer to the defense attorney to bash around your case on the witness stand.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I still believe it will be solved in time, but I want to ask you this, and we touched on this before. What was your clear rate?
My clearance rate was like 82%. And for some jurisdictions, they may say, our jurisdiction has, like a 99% clearance rate. And it's like, okay. With Dallas homicide detectives, when I was there, we usually pulled about 11 to 12 cases a year. And people may think, that's not a lot. That's barely one a month. But it's actually a lot, because while you're working these new cases that come up, you're still working on old cases, plus you're going out on cases that are assigned to your friends and coworkers, plus you're having to go and get search warrants, go talk with witnesses on old and new cases, going to court on cases for different hearings and trials. And there was a person named Vernon Gebert, who's supposed to be one of the big gurus of homicide investigation. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but I actually went to one of his seminars, and he was a very knowledgeable person. But he said that a homicide detective should really never be given more than like 5 to 7 cases a year at the absolute maximum. And when you have people talk about jurisdictions where they have close to 100% clearance rate, if you look at it, most of those detectives are only assigned 1 to 2 cases a year. So for Dallas, an 82% clearance rate was actually very good. Probably not the best, but it was good. It's something that I was very happy with.
Yeah, I think it's a great rate. I mean, that's the thing. There's homicide detectives that worked in little sleepy towns and had a few cases. And then you're talking Dallas, a major metroplex where there's so many more homicides that take place. This is my question of those. So of the 18% that weren't cleared, what would you say the percentage of it was that, listen, you knew who the suspect was, you knew who did this, you just couldn't prove it, compared to no idea who did it?
The vast majority of the cases that I wasn't able to clear, I had a pretty good idea or knew for certain who the suspect was. I just didn't have enough to file the case. There was only a couple of cases that were, complete mystery whodunits to me.
Mystery whodunits. Gosh, and I know it's not that long ago you retired. Mystery whodunits. Can you give us an example of a mystery whodunit? Because I got to say, in my years of working, and again, that's a big, huge, vast kind of cases, right? A hodgepodge of all different cases as opposed to being focused on just homicides. Tell me one example of just like couldn't make the case, couldn't figure out a suspect.
I'm trying to think. Probably the closest one to that is where we just got a phone call to an apartment where there's a black male about 45, 50 years old that was found deceased in his apartment, and he had been strangled. And going through his phone records, talking to friends and family, we couldn't find any link to criminal activity that may have led to his demise. He was just dead right there, and there weren't any prints, there weren't any surveillance videos, there weren't any murmurings from any of his friends or family as to who might want to have killed him. He was just dead right there with no other clues.
And do you think in a case like that, the cases that are really difficult to solve as opposed to the other ones that you were able to solve, do you think that it, in large part, is based on if an individual wasn't at all related to the person? In other words,
That makes a huge difference, because in the vast majority of cases, there's a link from your suspect to your victim that you can identify, and you can usually identify it pretty quickly. And that link is usually through some type of criminal activity. Probably 85 to 90% of all the murders that I worked were in some way, shape, or form connected to drug dealing. And it was through those connections that we were usually able to identify the suspect. In the vast majority of other cases, you have some kind of domestic link, either a roommate, a lover, or some other activity that the person was engaged in with another, that people could say, hey, you need to go talk to this person because they had this type of relationship and it may have led to a conflict. And then so you start talking to people, developing information, getting warrants for cell phone records, showing where people were when the offense happened. And you're usually able to narrow down the list of people who wanted the victim dead, and then eliminating them through various processes.
how many homicide cases did you have roughly where the person wasn't related? In other words, they didn't even know the person, but for whatever reason, whether the motive was money or some other thing, how many of those would you say percentage-wise?
There's probably about 5%, I would say, where there was absolutely no connection, where it was just like a robbery where a person gets shot and killed. I had a couple of those, but thankfully those were able to be cleared up. So they were actually very few, maybe 5%. In the rest of them, there was some type of connection that we could establish.
And so in a case like this, where you're looking at 6 months, there's something I find very interesting, and I keep saying it over and over and over again. There's a big difference between not having a suspect identified and a case being cold. They're totally nothing to do with each other in a sense. I mean, they can be related, but in this case, it has been said, I've heard 50,000 leads. I've heard tens of thousands of leads. I've heard 10,000 leads. Let's just go with the lowest.
Okay. Yeah. The thing is when people start talking about how many leads there are, it's not how many leads, it's how many credible leads. You can have 1,000 people call in saying, oh, I really think this person's involved. Okay, why do you think that? Well, I just have a feeling because, I saw them on a TV show when they were talking, about the death of that person. They reached up and they scratched their ear, and that means that they're self-soothing, so they have to be involved. And to them, that's a lead. Uh, there's a big difference between the number of leads and the number of quality leads. And for instance, in a case like this, you may have 10,000 people calling in tips, but how many of those tips or leads that are being called in are truly credible and may actually lead to the identification of the suspect? And this case is 6 months old, but is it cold? You have to ask the detective in charge of that case, because as long as there's evidence that's still being processed, worked on, analyzed, it's not cold. For instance, I know that there's those mixtures of DNA that they're still working on. It's not going to be cold until they're done analyzing those mixtures and decide that the mixtures of no value to them. As long as there's something to do, something to process, the case is not cold.
So Dale, something's happened that really surprised me because I've never seen this happen as a case agent with a fellow special agent. In other words, if you're the case agent assigned to the case and things aren't going great, and you don't have a suspect, or you have a suspect, but you're not able to develop the information you need to charge, you don't, in the Bureau, kick the person off the case. As long as they're working and doing their best to solve the case. I just haven't seen that. It just doesn't really happen. They're not going to get assigned the case unless there's a lot of confidence in them in the first place. And the last thing typically management does, unless they've done something illegal, is snatch them off. But in this case, we just got recent information within the last couple of weeks. Again, this is from a retired Pima County sheriff. Of course, Pima County is where this occurred, officer, who came on and said basically one of his old buddies, who is a sergeant detective now, that the case got reassigned from the initial detective. The initial detective, just so you know, you probably know this, but just in case you don't, had 6 months on as a detective and was given this case. And that, of course, has caused a lot of consternation with a lot of people, asking why the more salty detectives weren't given this case. But now there's been a detective change. Have you seen something like that if a case hasn't been solved in 6 months, where they snatch you off? Because this to me is a local, I think something that must happen more often in the locals than in the Bureau. Talk to us about when you've seen it, if you've seen it.
The only time I've seen detectives taken off a case is really when they were removed from homicide for one reason or another. I've never seen anybody removed from a specific case because the command staff lacked confidence in them. Usually, if a detective is struggling, you would think that they wouldn't take the case away from the junior or less experienced detective. What they do is they just assign somebody else to the case to assist him and help guide him through everything, rather than just take him off the case.
Well, and I always say with the source information, because again, this is a source, right? He's a buddy of, this person that purportedly has been assigned. I always say you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because, it could be like you said, yeah, the other guy's still on it. He just is also co-assigned as a co-case agent or a co-detective. But anyway, when I heard that, I found that very interesting. I was trying to decide in my own mind whether this would be punitive or whether it's for show. I guess it's really not for show if they didn't come out and make a big deal about it in the media. So anyway, I just wondered if you had seen that, and it sounds like it's not a usual circumstance.
No, no. But, by the same token, there were lots of people who rotated in and out of homicide, but the reasons why they rotated in and out were usually because they got promoted and became a sergeant and were reassigned, or there was another assignment that came up that they were interested in working and wanted to go do that instead. So even if this investigator or detective was removed from the case, there's a lot of different reasons why that could be. It could be, oh, there's a spot in the canine unit opened up, and he's always wanted to be a canine officer, so let me go do that. Or it could be, he got promoted from detective to a sergeant or a lieutenant. I don't know what the rank of their investigators are, but there's a lot of different reasons why the case may have been reassigned. One of my friends got promoted to sergeant, and 2 years later, there's some information that developed on one of his old cases, and it was assigned to me. But it was assigned to me not because he was incompetent, but he got promoted. Somebody had to work the case.
Right. So that's such a great point. There's a lot of reasons. Of course, the big speculation is that, they're kind of trying to start anew, trying to get a fresh set of eyes. But I think it's really important to point out that a lot of people saying this have never been a homicide detective.
Yeah. And also, you figure that, in my mind, if I was the supervisor of that unit and I was frustrated because I don't think that this detective was putting forth the quality of work on this case that I wanted, I still wouldn't remove him from the case, because if it eventually gets cleared, then you're going to have to try to explain to the prosecutor and the jury and the judge why this person was removed. And
Exactly.
if you're doing it because he was incompetent, then you just put the entire case into question because, well, you had an incompetent person, running this for 6 months, and he was so bad that you actually had to pull him off from it and reassign it to somebody else to try to rehabilitate the case. And rather than have to worry about that headache, it'd be much easier to just bring on another detective to help him with the case, because then you don't have to try to explain to prosecutor, judge, and jury why you basically fired that person from the case.
Yeah, and that makes a lot more sense to me, that would have been the actual situation. You and I talked about a long time ago what happened in this case, whether it was a burglary gone bad, whether this was a planned, gang cartel type hit that went south, and they decided to take Nancy, last minute, whether this was a kidnapping for ransom. And long time ago, months ago, when we first talked about this, we both believed, Occam's razor type people, that it was kidnapped for ransom. But I don't know if you know what happened with this, but very recently, after a article appeared in Reuters is a news source. I don't pay attention to Reuters. I don't follow Reuters, but I know a lot of people do. And Reuters came out and said, listen, an official with the FBI, I couldn't believe it even when I heard all of this, but that official with the FBI said that the ransom notes that have been investigated from the beginning, that were first sent the day after the kidnapping to a local media station, and then on day 3 sent to TMZ, that were just released, by the way, from Pima County, put them out. And after Reuters said that, right after, and this is only the third announcement I have seen from the FBI in this whole case, they came out and said this, they said, first of all, some of the notes are bad. They're exploiting the case for extortion. And the other notes we're looking into still, which to me as an FBI agent, I know by their actions that they're deeming them legitimate. At least they think they're legitimate. So you could argue that the FBI is being fooled, but no matter what, their actions, having the family talk about them, having the family go through the machinations of getting with BAU to do these scripts, and then now specifically saying a kidnap for ransom. I just wanted to get your point of view for all of the people that are still in social media, still saying this isn't a kidnap for ransom. Have you ever seen the FBI or Dallas PD or anybody come out and make something this official and they just did it for fun?
No. And I actually looked at the 2 copies of the ransom notes that were put out. And especially with the first one, I mean, the suspect, and you have to believe that they're really the suspect, because not only do they say that they kidnapped Miss Guthrie, they also say that they want money for her return. And they also put in there information that would only have been known to the suspects and the officers at the crime scene, to show that, hey, you will know that we're really the people who did this, because here's a little detail that absolutely nobody else would know. And when they described the location of her watch and where it was, either an officer who was at that crime scene wrote that, or it was a suspect. And I don't think an officer who's at the crime scene is going to send that note. So
yeah, to the floodlight, right? Even describing the
yes.
color of the floodlight accurately.
Yes.
And that floodlight is up on the roof area. So it wasn't like it was accidentally taken out.
No. Yeah, and it
purposely.
wasn't something that you could see like the floodlight. Okay, if somebody had a drone or a pair of binoculars and were in back of the house, could they have seen that, oh, that floodlight's broken? Yeah, but they not only said, oh, a floodlight's broken, a white floodlight was broken. And add that was something from inside of the residence that only the suspect or one of the investigators would know, which was the location of that watch.
And I think on top of that too, Dale, it was very like, in my opinion, they did these 2 things purposefully. It wasn't that they were broken already and that the watch was just laying there. This is something they did to tell everybody, this is what I'm doing, so I was there. Did you get that impression?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Actually, I came up with a lot of impressions when I was looking at especially the first note. That note in itself raises a lot of questions just reading it. Questions I don't think we could ever answer.
I've had 2 of the leading statement professionals, one that studied under Peter Hyatt, who a lot of people consider to be the foremost expert in statement analysis. He's deceased now, but one of his proteges on that still is a police officer for Ohio. I had him on. He brought up a lot of we went word by word with these notes. And then I also had on a female named Lena Cisco, who was amazing. She's DOD, helped with the Guantanamo interviews. She came on. She teaches now mostly, or she teaches full-time. Mostly that's what she does, on statement analysis and interviewing. And she was great too. She brought up a couple of things that I hadn't even considered.
Well, good. I'm glad you talked to them, because then when I say something that sounds stupid, you can say, Dale, that's stupid, that what you said, because of this. This is what the experts say.
Oh, no, 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 no. I would never say that because I had a lot of
I don't
thoughts.
mind if you do,
I had
because
a
if I'm
lot of
corrected,
thoughts
that
about
means
the
I'm learning.
yes, yes. No, I mean, that's the thing. All you can do is, and I brought up a situation where I had a note on an extortion case, and I ended up getting very lucky with that case based on the writing, strictly on the writing. When I saw the note, I thought it was written with the left hand, and I noticed they spelled Bin Laden wrong. So my approach was going to be anybody involved as a witness in this case, I'm going to make them write the note out with their left hand. And then there was somebody who wrote the note out and spelled Bin Laden wrong the entire time, just like it was in the note. So,
Oh, that's good. I like
not
that.
about being a real genius, but just common sense here. And when you look at these notes, there's a lot to infer. One of the things I inferred, though, that one expert agreed with me, the other expert did not. I think there was some infusion of AI in the notes.
Well, that's one of the things, I will just briefly read off all of the little notes that I made reading the first letter.
Oh, I
And
should have had the letter up. I didn't know we were going to talk about the letter. This is great. I want to hear your thoughts and I'll compare it. And then, by the way, I have the third most leading expert coming on Monday, and I
oh,
can't
good.
wait to hear him. So
Another
let's see
person
if
to
you.
let me know just how stupid I am at this.
No,
But that's
no.
great. Okay. There's just a few notes that I scribbled down. The first one is, I wondered if they used AI because English was not their first language, or did they use a translating app?
Bingo.
Did,
That's exactly what. Are you listening to my podcast or
no,
something on
no,
the
and I
slide?
put down talks like an educated super villain like Hannibal Lecter. Uh, the only thing that kind of made it sound a little more human to me is, I think it was in the second note where they're apologizing, they used the term "you all," where I think it's not very likely that AI would use the term "you all." It's a very Southern thing, not "you guys" or "you people," but "you all." But if they were truly from the South, they just would have put a Y and all. Uh, I also put down that with the first letter, there was no proof of life offered with the demand. Was she dead already? Because you would think that if she was alive, they would have included a photo or something of her to prove that she was still alive, rather than just say, okay, she's alive, she's scared, give us the money. You would have thought that they would have included proof that she's alive with that. Also, you know, I put down 5 p.m., not saying Eastern time, Central time, or Mountain time, which means they live at least someplace relatively close where they're not in a different time zone. Uh, Also, I put down the hearts mentioned, showing that they didn't mean to kill her. Her condition did, and they might actually feel bad about that. Uh, and really, that's it.
Yeah. So my take, the take of the first uh, expert, and kind of a partial take of the second of Lena, we all think that it's likely somebody who wasn't English as a first language.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you, this is the reason why it sounded like that to me. Uh, my one of my sons is married to a girl from Venezuela, and her parents live with my son, and they are non-English speakers. So when my wife and I are visiting them, it's not uncommon for us to use an app to communicate back and forth with my daughter-in-law's parents. And some of the words in there just reminded me of some of the odd word choices that AI or the translating app sometimes use. Because it doesn't come out like regular spoken English when it's truly translated.
Yeah, it jumped off the page for me, but I tell you, Lena is more on the fence, and she said she's on the fence because I want to see a baseline, and she's absolutely right. It is so hard when you don't have anybody's baseline to figure some things out, but she's leaning toward that. And all three of us are, well, I'm pretty sure the first expert is very sure, and the second expert is still, she wants a baseline, that it was a female writer, not porch guy. I've been calling it a surrogate writer. They're not carrying the baby. They didn't do the crime necessarily, but they know everything about it.
Yeah, and that could very well be. But then again, if it's AI or a translating app that's being used, it could still be a guy because it could be the app or AI is using the slightly flowery language that a woman would use and not a guy. And one of the things that also kind of surprised me was it wasn't copied and pasted from the app if they were using an app to do it, because there's a word that's misspelled. And I don't think the app or AI would misspell a word.
That's really, we've talked so much about the word receive, right? Because 3 times it's spelled correct, and then another time they mess up the I and the E. And one of the things, and that's why I had brought up that other case, that extortion note, it wasn't exactly an extortion note. Well, it kind of was. It was, there's a bomb on the plane, and they were going to take the plane down. This was right after 9/11. We literally had to get up fighter pilots and escort that plane down. And if the plane went any place other than where it was escorted to go, we were going to, Anyway, that's what that case was. But this note that was found. But the only reason I digressed to that was to just say that when people make mistakes, just in my experience, in cases, in life, they keep making them. Like, when you have a word you have trouble spelling, you make the mistake of misspelling it all the time. Now, get this, which is really interesting. I spent way too much time on this, by the way, instead of doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. And looking at the words that AI will write when they are writing narratives. So not when you say, hey, check my work or this or that, but when you give AI the ability to create, it doesn't think. It does patterns, and it messes up patterns, right? So these words don't mean what it means to us. It's patterns. And so you will see AI mess up and all of a sudden spell a word wrong. So that actually made me think it might be AI. Lena doesn't think any of it is AI. By the way, the first expert does. You were leaning toward at least infused. I'm definitely leaning toward infused. She doesn't think, or translating app, whatever you want to call it, she thinks it isn't in any part. That was about the only thing that we weren't on the same page on. And particularly another thing, and I'm curious whether you have found this with your in-laws, is I'm a Spanish speaker, but I'm a native English speaker as my first language. What I find to be almost the hardest thing when I speak Spanish or write Spanish is remembering my future imperfect, past preterite. It's so different in both languages. And someone barely exists. In other words, I will go. Yo voy a ir, right? That's the only way they have to say it. We can say, we have other ways, and in both languages, they don't translate in equally. So I don't know if you noticed in the note, but everything in the note is in the future tense. It doesn't even say it's happening.
Yeah,
It literally says, we are going to,
yeah, I didn't notice that.
Oh, it's crazy because you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I thought you already did that. No, they're talking about in the future sense. So she points out, she thinks the note was written well in advance of it happening and that it was very purposeful. Whereas for me, I wondered if it might be a translation issue with them just not translating to English well.
Yeah, well, you see, I'm looking at it like, we have your mother Nancy. She is safe, but she's scared. So
Yep.
that's not in the future.
That's not in the future. But if you go on, there's a lot of places that are. It skips back and forth. And that's why I thought it was a translation error.
Yeah, and it could very well be. I don't think that this talks like a regular person. And unless this is a person who's a script writer who wants to use flowery language and sound like, he's some kind of supervillain.
Yeah. Throwing all that in. I mean, you and I agree on that, although I think the second note is real. It's no ransom note, right? They're not asking for any money. It's really an apology.
No, it is.
And that's rare and weird and makes you think that why I always have said it's a self-serving statement because they thought the heat was on once the porch guy video was released on the 10th. That came after this note was released, which was on the 6th. But I wondered if, with everything they're seeing in the media, if they're thinking the heat is on. And I want to make it crystal clear. I know you've seen this, right? These statements that they told people before their arrest and everything to mitigate their role.
Yeah,
they love to do that.
And they really wanted to get the point across that they didn't kill her. Her heart condition killed her. She was just in their custody when it happened. So it's almost like it's not really our fault, it was her heart that killed her, not us. We're just going to bury her out in the desert.
Yeah, don't bad guys always mitigate everything? Oh, I didn't mean
They
it
do.
to happen that way.
They do.
Have you ever heard a bad guy just come up to you about a homicide and, I hated the MFer and I wanted to freaking kill him? It's rare.
Well,
it happens.
No.
Oh, tell us the story.
I was not a homicide detective. I was working a beat in West Dallas. And we got called out on a stabbing that turned out to be a murder. And what happened was this woman had her 2 adult sons living with her. And one son was just a no good layabout. And the other son was just a hardworking guy. And what happened was, hardworking guy, he's at work at like 2 a.m, and his mom called him and told him, hey, when you get home, there's some pork chops that I made in the refrigerator. And when hardworking son got home, there's no pork chops in there. They've been eaten, and his layabout brother, who does nothing except sponge off mom and everybody else, had eaten them. Well, he just became enraged and stabbed his brother to death over that. And when we were walking him out of the house, and this house was a very narrow, small house. A lot of people would call it a shotgun house. We had to walk him past his brother's body. And as we were walking him past his brother's body in the hallway, he kicks his brother's body and says, and I wish he was alive so I could kill him again.
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess he didn't mitigate his actions.
No, no, he did not. He let us know just how angry he was with his brother and that he was not sorry for what he did and that he wishes his brother was alive so he could do it all over again.
So how many years did he get?
I have no idea. That case pled out and I never got called to trial on it. Although I always wanted to try that woman's pork chops.
Yeah, they were worth a lot. I always tell everybody, with all these crimes, there's typically a proximal event. It's
Yes.
not like they just, they're going along. When you see something happen, at the time it happens, there's something that happened that made it happen at that time.
Yes.
Pork chops or something.
I've had some good pork chops.
I want to update you too on another thing this is probably the most recent news we've had. I've got a few to point out. A lot of the folks in here are very seasoned about this case, and I've talked about each of these things. But there was a recent search. In other words, again, we see the FBI. It appears to be the FBI to me in unmarked vehicles. And they're searching this area. This is Nancy's house. This is her little, as you probably know, the little cabana house that nobody lives in, but she used to rent it out a long time ago. Nobody was living in here at the time. A bunch of junk is in there. And then her house, this is the back view of her house. Of course, this is this bedroom. I don't know if you could see my cursor, this grassy area, and then the pool. But back here, there's actually even a road of ingress and egress back in there. So anyway, they were searching again. I have lost track of the searches. I mean, there were 4 real searches with the house, the roof, the septic tank, 2 different interior searches. But on the outside, there's been so many, Dale, I can't even give you a number, but probably this has to be, I don't know.
Do you have any reason why they would be doing this search after 6 months? Did a piece of information come in saying, well, so-and-so said that they did it and they left, something, behind the house or lost something?
So what I thought when I saw this is because there have been torrential monsoons there. I mean, it's washing away land. It's pretty bad. And so I thought perhaps that could lend itself. And then the other thing was exactly what you said there. And that is somebody gave some piece of information.
Yeah, it's so far from the actual date of the offense. You almost wonder how much of the value that any evidence that is found now would have. You'd figure almost all of the evidentiary value, unless it identifies somebody specifically, would have been lost because that piece of evidence would be so easy to attack by a defense attorney, saying, hey, okay, that wasn't there before, and you say it's been uncovered. Well, in those rains, couldn't that have washed away from, or washed up here from a long ways away, and how do you link this to our suspect? So I'd find it hard that almost anything of evidentiary value could be made, but kudos, to them for trying at least.
Yeah, unless somebody said something like something was buried back there.
Yeah. Or, hey, so-and-so said he lost his walkie-talkie, or, dropped a knife or a stick that he used to bust out the light.
Speaking of walkie-talkie, I always like to pull this up because I'm 100% convinced that is a 2-way radio, aka walkie-talkie, and that more than one was involved. But anyway,
we agree on that.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of them. I had a 3 different ones that I found at Walmart, since the guy is dressed wholly in Walmart garb, everything. I figured he also bought that at Walmart. And I found ones perfectly matching this small antenna type configuration. All right. Anyway, another development that happened. So basically your answer to that is, unless there was specific information, it doesn't make much sense to go back out and all of a sudden do a 6-month search. What about the fact that this new detective is on it? Do you think that they would have wanted to take him out there, or they would have taken him into the house, or he would have been in, right? If you get a new guy on it?
You might, and sometimes if you haven't been to a crime scene, it's hard to make sense out of a crime scene from just pictures, photos, and schematics. And I'll give you a good for instance. After I retired from Dallas, I went to work as an investigator for the Collin County DA's office. And I was working with this prosecutor on a murder case that they were preparing for trial. And she had never been to the crime scene, and she was trying to make sense out of where a certain piece of evidence was found and why things happened the way they did in that apartment. And I asked her, I said, have you ever been to that apartment? And she said, no. I said, well, let's go. And if we can't get into that exact apartment, ask the apartment manager to see if we can go into a vacant apartment that's very similar. And once we went into the actual apartment where the offense happened, because the people who live there now were nice enough to let us in, you could just see things starting to click in her mind. She then understood, okay, if someone was holding a gun here and they discharged it, it makes sense that the shell would have hit this wall, which is real close, and bounced and been found over here on the opposite side of the room, because the room was actually very small and it would have been easy for that to happen. And you could just see she understood things a lot better. So if there's a new detective assigned to the case, I can understand why he would want to go out and actually walk the area and see the crime scene firsthand. You know, there's a friend of mine, we're both big Civil War buffs, and we've read, about a lot of different Civil War battles. And when you're reading accounts of the battles and looking at maps and diagrams, you get an idea of how the battle progressed. But once we would actually go out and physically walk the battlefield, just like at a crime scene, you develop a different type of appreciation for what happened, and you understand why things and how things happened a lot better.
Yeah, I totally agree. As when I do expert witness work, if it's anything involving a case where I don't have video, I do a site survey. Even when I do have video, I do a site survey. I want to be out there, because you know how when you're looking at, say, a house online and the rooms look huge and it looks like the ceiling's 20 foot tall, and then you get there and you say, wait a minute, what kind of cracker barrel job is this on the videos that they did? So anyway, I agree with you. Everything looks so much different when you're actually there and you can see the spacing and hear, what's going on and have some idea for everything. Something else that came out that I wanted to talk to you about was, I was just curious about your take. So as you may know, there have been oodles, scads of streamers, right? People that do what I do, right? They sit on it and they have guests and they talk about the Nancy Guthrie case. But there was a group that gathered outside for a long period of time, really almost 6 months on and off. They've been there. I've got great videos of the neighbors losing it, screaming at them, going off. Then people started getting arrested. Basically, Pima County cracked down on these guys, arrested one of them. I think in large part because some of them did, shenanigans like this where they would dress up and they had a porta potty and they would pee and it was just a mess. So my question to you is, what do you think about this? If you're on public land, that's that roadway, you're there for months. Um, where are you on First Amendment rights? That's what I want to ask you about with this.
If the person's in a public space where they have a right to be, even if they're doing something that you don't like, they're allowed to do it. If they're saying things that you don't like and they're in a public place, they're allowed to do it. I'm very much a free speech guy. And as annoying as those people can be, and as much as it negatively affects the quality of life of the people who live there, as long as the person is not engaging in disruptive or illegal behavior, you got to let them be there. But that's just my opinion. I'm just a poor old police. What do I know?
Well, what's interesting? I have the same view. I don't like that they dressed up like this. I don't like that they shot off fireworks. I don't like that they were drinking and smoking weed and having a great time and like a party atmosphere at times. But they did too. What they did, first of all, it's their right as long as they're on public property. And then secondly, they brought so much interest to the case, right? They bring in some cases, I'm not even kidding you, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, millions and millions of views. One guy in particular. These aren't small cats. These guys have huge audiences, and cumulatively, they much bigger than most mainstream media. If you put it all together, much bigger. And so they brought a lot of eyes on the case, which I always think is good. Because I've always said maybe there's somebody that knows Porch Guy, only he doesn't know Porch Guy is in trouble for anything. Where so many of us true crimers, we're newsies, we watch everything going on, but so many people work hard. They play games with their kids at night, right? They've got soccer and football and all these other things they're doing. They're not in touch with true crime. So what do you think about that premise that somebody could intersect with him and maybe even recognize him from these photos, but never saw these photos?
There's always that possibility. I think the possibility is extremely low because most of the people who would know him are probably criminals or thugs themselves. And it's been my experience that when you have criminals and thugs who will commit crimes of this magnitude, the people around them really don't want to snitch because they know if they're found out what the ramifications could be.
So do you still believe, because you just said would be part of a criminal element, do you still believe this guy, it sounds like you do, would have a criminal element in his background? In other words, this isn't just the gardener's nephew who never did anything wrong, that the gardener said, hey, this lady has a rich daughter, let's go for this.
If it was a made-for-TV movie, I would say that that's a possibility where all of a sudden somebody needs some money. Oh, what can we do for money? I know, even though I've never done anything bad in my life before, let's commit a kidnapping. No, I think when people get involved in criminal activity, they usually start off with small and petty stuff and work their way up to the more serious crimes. So if somebody's committing kidnappings, especially for ransom, I would I would believe that they've been engaged in various types of criminal activity for some time.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying there. So many people want to think that this is just some guy off the street that never did anything in his past, or that's related. They're blaming a lot of teachers out there too because her relatives are teachers. I want to ask you about this, and this gets really sticky for me. So first of all, I want to let you know Cash Patel's been on 3 different shows and said similarly 3 things. He's pretty much kept the same script. This was the latest one very recently on News Nation, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Assistance.
Okay.
I even visited our Tucson office where we had 150 agents and analysts working on the Nancy Guthrie case to provide intelligence. What the FBI is great at, what we did when we finally had access to the Ring doorbell camera, for example, we went to our partners at Google and we said, hey, we know that there wasn't a paid subscription service, but let's
Sorry, I'm going to
and
put
see if
that
we can
back
find a
up.
needle and a needle and a needle in a haystack.
Sorry, I'm going to start.
The FBI got to Tucson almost immediately to try and help Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. What's the update on that case?
From day one, the FBI offered up our assistance because it was a state and local matter. So we were not the lead agency because it was not being investigated as a federal matter because there was no evidence about a federal nexus to a federal crime. So we showed up immediately and offered our assistance. We were not let in for 4 days. And that's their choice. We continue to offer assistance. I even visited our Tucson office where we had 150 agents and analysts working on the Nancy Guthrie case to provide intelligence. What the FBI is great at, what we did when we finally had access to the Ring doorbell camera, for example, we went to our partners at Google and we said, hey, we know that there wasn't a paid subscription service, but let's go look at the metadata and see if we can find a needle and a needle and a needle in a haystack. And what do? We pull that out. Same thing with the DNA. We offered our assistants to go test the DNA, and it's up to them. They chose to use a private laboratory. It's like a child abduction case or missing persons case. You need the first 48 hours to hit the ground hard. And again, the state and locals are in charge of those investigations. We, the FBI, don't take ownership of them. We've continued to offer assistance. We continue to do it now. And we will show up for any investigative examinations that they wish our assistance on, whether it's our laboratories in Quantico. But that's the nature between state and federal and local law enforcement. And what you saw here in Ohio is when state and locals work together, it works really well.
So what do you think about that? Like this is your law enforcement partner. And we talked a lot yesterday about just your intersection with the FBI, with
Yes.
different agents that you dealt with.
Yes.
And
One of the things
think about that.
Mr. Patel said that I agree with is the FBI has a lot of resources. And like you and I were talking about yesterday, I said that when local officers reach out for the FBI, we don't necessarily want their assistance in doing the gumshoe work of the case, but we really want access to their resources, to their experts, to their technology that they have, like for processing, blood samples and different things. And if that stuff was offered up early on in this investigation and the Pima County Sheriff's Office didn't accept the help that was being offered, that's kind of shame on them, because I'm sure the FBI has access to a lot of resources that the Pima County Sheriff's Office does not. And even if they have similar resources, they probably don't have the quality of resources that the FBI has access to. And what Mr. Patel said is something that you and I both know, that we may not always know the answer to a question during our investigation. One of our greatest resources is our phone, because our phone will give us access to friends and coworkers and other people that we know who will have the answer. And even if our department doesn't have the resource, like Mr. Patel said, they didn't have the resource to do something, but they had contacts at Google that could, explore the information from her Ring doorbell camera and bring up evidence that otherwise never would have been discovered. And that's why you let agencies like the FBI assist, because even if they don't have the resources themselves, they know where to go to get the resources. And it's just a shame that they weren't allowed in early on in the investigation.
Yeah, I know.
Because who knows what other information would have been developed had they been there within the first 24 hours. Maybe that map would have been collected.
Maybe they didn't come back and get it 4 or 5 days later, but maybe they figured.
I know, but you could hope. You could hope.
You could hope. You could hope. The only point I wanted to make about what Kash Patel said was, I agree with everything you said, and I just wanted to add that the FBI has an absolute federal nexus to this case if they wanted it. Under 18 U.S.C. 1201, specifically sub B, says that after somebody's missing over 24 hours, it is assumed they have crossed state lines, and so federal jurisdiction can be used there. And then also, if they truly believe and have the goods to show that the note and that Bitcoin were used to communicate, which we know now Bitcoin was, for sure. And if those notes are real, anytime you use interstate commerce, in other words, communications, that also is the tie into the federal nexus. What I take, and he well knows that, he's an attorney, but he doesn't want the case. That's what I think. So from what I gleaned from this, the biggest thing I gleaned was the Bureau doesn't want the case because they are worried that they either aren't going to solve it, or that if they do solve it, they're not going to be able to get a conviction. And that's what jumped off the page to me, was his, we're here if you need us, but you basically screwed up so bad in the first 4 days by not getting us involved. We don't want this.
There is a lot of that. And if you were still working for the Bureau, would you want somebody to hand you that case?
I would. I actually would. I would salivate.
Okay, that's where we're different. I would say, I'm here to help you. I will do whatever you need me to do to further this investigation. But buddy, it's yours.
You are so funny. No, I like a challenge. I'd do it.
Oh, I think this case is more than a challenge right now.
Yeah, no, it is a mess. Finally, at least on this, and then I have one more subject that I wanted to ask you about. But on this, I want to let you know what in my opinion, this was completely orchestrated in terms of understanding the questions that were going to be asked. But I want to give you what Sheriff Nanos, Pima County Sheriff, said at the 6-month mark. Take a look.
It's very active.
Sorry, I got to remove this before I add something. Or it does that. Here.
Of work ahead of us. We've done a lot of work, but we still have more. And there's not just in DNA, where labs across the country are working together, but in forensics, analysis of thousands and thousands of videos, photos. And we also have still tens of thousands of tips that come in, and we actively work on them. So it's a very active investigation.
The department released 2 ransom notes. Why now?
Well, really 2 reasons. One, it's out there. People have been, media has covered some of this, and we just saw what was being said and felt like we need to put something out that's really accurate. And this was the time. We felt like, investigators felt like there's a number of pieces of information in these notes that it just might jar someone to say, I've heard that, or the wording, the style of the writing is, it might jog somebody to kind of think about who would have written this, how was this done? I think anybody who reads them, my investigators, we look at it, and clearly there's things in there that are very concerning to our investigative team. So we hope that by releasing the actual note, we'll get some response from the community.
Did the Guthrie family know you'd be releasing
Absolutely, absolutely.
6 months in, what's your relationship with the FBI?
It's a good relationship. It's always been a good relationship. We've been a member of what is known as the Southern Arizona Violent Crime Task Force, headed up by the FBI, for decades. We've always participated, and to this day we still do. It's not just a great relationship, it's one that's very valued.
What's your message to the community?
We think somebody knows something. We hope that by releasing some of this information, it will jog somebody to think about what. A lot of people have called this with information, but we also know a lot of people are hesitant to do so. And so I hope that by constantly reminding the public, we're here, we're not going anywhere. If you have information, someone knows who this person is. Someone knows something. We want that person to call us. We need that phone call.
Why haven't you held a press conference about this case?
The press conferences are actually more designed for when you have a very specific piece of information that you want out in front and you need help with. We do that. In this regard, we felt like just a media release was sufficient.
What's your message to the Guthrie family?
We're still here. We are not going away. If you could just see the team working, you would see the energy, the concern. They're fired up, and we'll continue to work this case hard.
Is there anything that I forgot to ask or that you want to add?
There is a number of issues have been brought up about people being cleared of this investigation. We served a few search warrants. We talked to individuals. And we move on, because if the evidence is there, we continue that path. But that doesn't mean those individuals are cleared. It just means that we met with them because we felt like there was a need. There was probable cause established through evidence, tips, whatever, and presented to a court, and we went on. Does that mean those individuals are cleared? Not necessarily. It just means that we took a look at something that was concerning to us, and now the evidence takes us elsewhere. But more to that point, I can't be any more clear. I said this earlier on, and I say it again. The Guthrie family is not and have not been suspects in this investigation. We have talked with them, worked with them. They are not suspects. They are victims of a very horrific crime.
If someone does have information that may help investigators, where should they call?
Either tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI, or 520-351-4900 is the Sheriff's Department tip line. You can even call 911. We just need you to call.
All right. Any thoughts?
Yeah, he sounds like a politician.
Doesn't sound like a cop at all, does he?
No, maybe a public information officer at a crime scene, but that's really about it.
Yeah,
And
I thought it
and
was interesting. He said he had a good relationship. When I played this the first time I ever played it, right after it, I played where he said, "Yes, I'm mad at the FBI. Yes, I can't stand the FBI," because he was investigated for years by the FBI for, I don't know, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million being siphoned off. Anyway, one of his underlings ended up taking the hit for that. But anyway, I don't have that one, but suffice it to say, he was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. The other thing was, and I want to know if this surprised you at all. This was my last question on this. She asked, she says, "Do the Guthries know you released the notes?" And before she can even finish her sentence, which was with most of these questions, he said, "Yeah, of course the Guthries know." What did you think about that?
I didn't think much about it because he just wants to let everybody know that he still has a good working relationship with the Guthries and that he's keeping them up to date with all the information that he has and that he's going to release so that they're not surprised or sidelined. The part that I thought was interesting is when he's trying to justify the search warrants that his department's executed and the interviews of persons of interest or suspects that he did, because it sounds like he was concerned about something with them. I don't know what it is, but
You're so astute, because right before this, his department got sued by one of them because they messed up his house and, ruined his life with this search warrant that was served at his house. So this is right on the heels of that. So he wants to be, I think he's totally protecting. Listen, we thought it was them. We were wrong. He was this, all of that. So you're very astute because he was covering for all of that.
yeah, because that doesn't seem like something that would normally come up in just a little interview like this, where you're basically just there to give people an update on a case.
I said it was the last Nancy Guthrie question. I have another. So Sheriff Nanos accidentally, when he released the notes, it's probably not the note you have there, but there was a long redacted number in the notes that were the final release. But just for a couple of minutes, he had sent out that Bitcoin address. He didn't catch it, and then they pulled it all back and then redacted it and sent it right back out. So, of course, all of us on this side that are paying close attention to the case snagged that. I think I had 3 different people send it to me like that right after it came out.
It's good to know people.
The team, the research team I have in the background, oh my gosh, I'll put them up against any FBI IA. They are really good. But nevertheless, after that, I went to our Bitcoin expert. Again, that's what he does for a living. He's not a talking head. He deals in Bitcoin every day. Nodes, he's educated us. He's done 3 or 4 shows with us. But I said, "Mr. Vargas, you got to help me here. Here's the Bitcoin address. Tell me everything." And oh my gosh, he shows when it's set up, who set up the account, what amount went in, 0.0022 Bitcoin, when it went in. It went in, by the way, the same day that this was released to the public. But the most interesting thing for me, because a lot of that we had heard rumors about what happened, but the most thing that we had never heard about was they, at the same time, Dale sent this message, meaning law enforcement / the Guthries. It says, "We are ready to pay. Contact." And then they put up this address that you click on. And then after the person accesses it, it explodes. So basically, it becomes non-existent after bad guy would open it. He also explained that law enforcement could have put a time frame on it, like for this to be corrupted after 6 months or 2 weeks or whatever. But I told him that the Bureau would never want that. They would want to keep the possibility of them reaching out open. So my belief is that this was indeed clicked on by bad guy, but we have no idea if it was answered, if they said anything. Remember in the first note, they said, we're not going to contact you. But then, of course, they wrote the second note. But this is what I wanted to ask you about right after this comes out. And I did this show on this address and possible communication that wouldn't be publicly seen. I want to show you what Savannah Guthrie says. Oh, let me get that off the scene and see what you think. I want to know what you think she meant by this. Here we go.
It has been months since our mom was taken from us. Our family is in agony. We are in a nightmare that will not end. Nothing about our situation has changed. We have done our part, and we will never stop looking for her. We will always ache for her and feel that hole in our hearts. The world can be a cruel and unforgiving place, and I know that you have tried to do things the right way. So I'm asking you, begging you to do the right thing now. Make the right choice. Help us find her. Tell us where to look for her. I truly believe it is never too late to do the right thing. Help us bring this situation to an end. For all of us, no matter where we've been and what we've done, I believe there is always a way home. Please make the right choice.
My question is, what do you think she means when she says, we've done our part?
Okay, before I answer that, when was this made in relation to the second note?
Oh, this was done at about the 6-month mark. The second note came out on the 6th of February. So 6 months later.
Okay, so it sounds like she had communication with somebody that she believed was the suspect. Maybe by her saying that they've done their part, maybe they paid them money and they're just trying to find the location of their mother's grave.
Yeah, it just really bothers
But it also sounds like there might be a little veiled threat in there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm convinced, of course, that this was written at least probably fully written by BAU. But then she can decide if she, how she wants to impart the actual message. But like all of these messages, they definitely refer to that second note. I totally agree with you, even though it's way later. There's 7 messages, Dale. This is number 7. So she's done a lot of messaging related to those notes. But this made me wonder if she could have sent it and we don't know, or maybe she just communicated in this way, like this is what she means by we've done our part.
Yeah, well, you see, when she said we've done our part, that to me makes me think that they paid some money somehow to someone, but they haven't gotten what they said that they paid the money for, which was information about probably where her mother's remains are.
And the reason we can't know about it is because they use this link to communicate. So we know no Bitcoin was paid on the public Bitcoin account other than the test by the Bureau. So she could have paid it, received another Bitcoin address and paid it there. And that's what she could be referring to. Or she could just, I guess, be referring to, we did our part with this. But don't you think that how she opens it up with, this is a very specific message. And by the way, just so you know, she did this literally right after Nanos made the mistake to send out the Bitcoin address, and our Bitcoin expert broke this story about this going out.
Yeah. Yeah. I really hate to surmise. Well, all I can really say is what it appears to be. And it just does appear to be like a plea to get what she thinks she paid for because she hasn't gotten it yet. But it sounds like she paid something to someone.
Yeah, that was my first inclination to think that too. And remember, she did put up $1 million for the ransom, or for the reward if somebody came forward. So I thought if she's willing to do that, and remember, that's only 1/45 of her worth, of her net worth. What's 1/45 of your and my net worth?
Well, how much are my Doc Watson CDs worth? About $18. So 1/4 of that would be $1.28.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about 1/45 of what you have, it doesn't seem like a lot.
No.
All right. Last but not least, and thank you so much, really, for sharing all your thoughts about Nancy. I wanted to really dig in deep with you because I know you've been in these shoes where you've had a case go 6 months and no
longer.
suspect, and longer. It probably just weighs on you. And you and I talked about one of those cases that still weighs on you.
Yes, we did.
And the case you and I did, or were involved with, came together.
Yeah, I still get irritated every time I think about that.
I can't even think about that case. But anyway, we won't digress. Let's talk about this news, because you shared with me yesterday that you actually have connection with the judge, meaning you know these guys that were involved in this. The judge, for anybody who doesn't know, this is Carmelo Anthony. This is Mr. Austin Metcalf in the yellow. He was brutally stabbed to death at a track meet in McKinney, Texas, right in the chest. One stab left him dead. Carmelo then runs, drops the knife. He's quickly apprehended. He says it was all self-defense. He was convicted. He received 35 years, where he's hanging out now in a Texas prison. And now, you know, the appeal process starts, and Carmelo's team wants the judge that presided over his trial tossed. They ended up tossing him, saying that he invoked a gag order in a lot of different proceedings that should not have been done without a motion. That was the reason given. Dale, give us your insights.
Well, one, I sat in on several cases before Judge Roach when I was an investigator for Collin County. I don't know him personally. If he were to meet me, he probably wouldn't have a clue as to who I am. But everything that I have seen of Judge Roach, he's a very good, honest judge. And it was always very pleasant to watch him at work. You could tell that he knows his job, and he's just a fair person and all about doing justice and the right thing and following the law.
So bothered you that he would?
It did, because you hate to see somebody that you know is a very honest person who did a really good job in a very public, controversial situation. You hate to see his integrity questioned and his ability to maintain fairness. You hate to see that questioned. and have him removed from the case.
Right. No matter any way you slice it, it is whether he put in a gag order with no motion or whether it was because of comments he made to the media, which that is also out there. No matter what, it's such a slap in the face to a judge to be removed from the next phases that are coming up. But to be clear to everybody, there's been no retrial order. There's nothing that's happened in that regard. There's still in the appeal process, but he
Yes,
won't
yes,
be listening to anything.
No, and to me that's a shame, because I know he is a good, fair, honest judge. And it was always, very pleasant to sit in the back of the courtroom listening to the cases before him. And you could tell whenever he made a ruling, it's not what he wanted to rule, it's what the law dictated he rule.
Right. Yeah. It's disappointing, but this is going to wage on for a long time. They've made so much in this GoFundMe amount, so they've got that, but they're not even using that, by the way, everybody. They have public defenders and individuals who are just volunteering to go pro bono. So
Yeah, and
attorneys
that's
are
what's
being paid.
irritating about cases like this to me, is so many people, because this has become, a caused celeb, that people are really doing things not for justice, but because they think they can make more money at it. I mean, how much money did the family raise for Carmelo's defense? How much of that money was actually used for his defense? Especially when like you said, there's pro bono lawyers who are going to take over the case, and it just frustrates me to no end seeing stuff like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. There were 2 questions, by the way, and was there anything else you wanted to say, though, Dale, about Judge Roach? I know you wanted to get it out there, just what an honorable person he was in your experience.
Yes.
Is there anything else you
also,
wanted to add?
Yeah, the prosecutor in this case, Bill Werski, if you're not from Texas, you probably haven't heard of him. But in Texas, he's a little bit of a living legend because of some of the cases that he's prosecuted. If anyone wants to look this up, I think he was the number 2 chair in the Texas 7 case, where you had people who escaped from a penal institution and went on a big crime spree. And also there was the Kaufman County case where local justice, was it the justice of the peace or constable that killed some judges and prosecutors? And Bill was the prosecuting attorney on those cases. And he's one of the most knowledgeable attorneys I've ever dealt with. I met him when I was working as a robbery detective, and we've maintained a bit of a relationship, throughout his tenure at Dallas. And then when he went to Collin County, we reestablished a relationship because I started working for Collin County as an investigator. And he's just one of those brainiacs that is just a super prosecutor. And so if he was in charge of the prosecution in this case, he would not allow some misstep with the defense or the judge or anything that could jeopardize the case that he was presenting, because he's not going to want to retry this.
I think it's really good to get your perspective on it. And I personally appreciate you sharing it, because everybody wonders what kind of a prosecutor is he? Was he in his past? Are they experienced? Is this judge a a good guy, at least in your experience. And you can say from a work vantage, yes, very good.
Yeah, I've worked numerous cases with Bill, and he is just a super prosecutor. You would be hard pressed to find somebody who's better than him. You might find a few that are as good, but very few that are better.
If I may, because I know we've gone way over, but if I may, there's just a couple questions that came from the audience that I think deserve your attention, if you don't mind. One is, do you think you recognize any possible occupation of the note writer?
Yes. Part-time kidnapper.
Doggone it, Dale.
No, I'm sorry that I can't glean anything from the note, especially since I think that it's not entirely human generated.
You know, one of the things Lena Sisko said about what she had to say about an occupation was seemingly a 9 to 5 person. And she says that because it's so odd to throw in 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, like that's when the day's over and I can look into this. So she believes that it's somebody with a 9 to 5 type of job that wrote it. Again, we both believe it's a surrogate writer, not the actual kidnapper, but somebody related to the kidnapper. And then the second reason was she said, or they say in the notes, it's best if they use the word completed. If we can just get this completed, like you're talking about a art project or something, not a kidnapping.
Yeah.
And so for those reasons, she wondered if it's somebody, with a normal 9 to 5 job of some nature that actually was the note writer.
Yeah. Or you're just trying to give a definite date and time that you need to have the deal completed by, otherwise they're going to do what they're going to do. So also banks usually close by 5, so that might have something to do with it.
Of course, though, the Bitcoin, but I know what you're meaning, that the person might have to do a monetary transaction to get $1 million to then put in the easy Bitcoin. Yeah. The other thing the other question, well, one of the things I wanted to preface was, besides law enforcement being in Nancy's house, there was also a lot of family. Her family was in there. So people want to use that point, is that if family were in there, even though these notes are written a day later, that they would have also have seen the watch at the end of the bed. Maybe not, depending on their panic and concern. They might not have even noticed that detail. They could have. And then the floodlight, they would have also had to gone out if it was family, and even if it was law enforcement, and look over at the floodlight. And as we know, law enforcement didn't even notice there were cameras on the roof for days. So from that standpoint, I don't know, but I wanted to point that out. And then that begs this question, and this is the last one. Why do you think, with approximately 25 billboards that are up right now with Nancy's face on them, billboards that don't have Porch Guy's face, who they're looking for, billboards that aren't in Spanish, even though considering where this happened at, why do you think they refuse to modify them and put, which by the way takes a click of a button because they're all electronic, put Porch Guy's face on? And in conjunction with that, why do you think not only are they not searching, I think both of us realize that's because of resources, but they refuse to let, for instance, the United Cajun Navy, that wrote a 40+ page, might have been 60 pages, dissertation on all the dogs they have, all the resources they have, all the people, their search plan for the Sonora Desert, which is where she lives right in. She actually is in the Sonoran Desert. and all the other groups that have offered their help?
Okay, there's a lot there that you just said.
Gosh, that's a terrible question.
No, one, why they wouldn't change the billboards to show porch guy or have things in Spanish. That's one of those questions I can't answer why they won't do that. Do I think that they should? Oh, yeah, very much so. You know, you should also have Nancy Guthrie's face on the board at the same time so they make the association and don't just drive by and see an odd looking, masked person on a billboard. But with the Cajun Navy and also the equine search agencies that I'm sure offered their services, it goes back to why didn't Pima County utilize the FBI and all of their resources when they were first offered? Why wouldn't they accept the help of the Cajun Navy and other organizations that could have organized a really good search of possible or likely areas where she could have been secreted or buried? I don't know. Should they have done it? If it was my case, I'd have said, yeah. I was always, if you can help me, I'm going to take your help. As long as you're trained and you're not going to screw things up, I will give you parameters to work within, but please help me. I will take your help.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've kind of beat this up without you knowing about it a million times, about the billboards, about flyers. We beat it up about how in the world can't you still be searching? Why did you stop searches on day 2? We've talked about it, but I tell you, and this is the only thing that would make sense, is that you know who your suspect is. I mean, I'm not saying they do know that. I'm just saying if you know where Nancy is and where she's buried or where she was taken to, you wouldn't want to, after everything's solved, say, oh my gosh, you had the Cajun Navy out there for weeks and months searching the Sonoran Desert, which is dangerous, because the temperatures and all these other groups, when you knew all this time that they took her to Mexico. I'm just making a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Someplace. Or you knew who Porch Guy was? You
Yeah.
knew who Porch Guy was. What do you think about that?
If they knew that she was taken outside of the U.S. and to Mexico, I can understand why people would be hesitant about going there and searching for her if they knew where her body was, just because there's going to be a lot of strong cartel concerns then. But you would still get the authorities to help find her by saying, hey, we know she's here. And is anybody going to be totally flipping out if they actually find her body there? No. A lot of this just doesn't make sense to me, Jennifer.
I agree. It doesn't make sense.
I'm sitting here and I've got like 1,000 different things going through my head, and just none of them make sense to me in any way, shape, or form. Like, why refuse the help of the FBI when it's offered? I wouldn't want the FBI to come in and say, we're taking over your case, because I'd say, no, it's mine. I'm investigating this. But if they said, hey, we want to come in and make all of our resources available to you, it's like, yes, please. Cajun Navy comes in, we want to make our resources available to you. Yes, please, thank you. Because just think of all the time that you're saving yourself then, how much quicker the investigation's going to progress. All of the evidence that you may find that can now be processed, where if you waited a few days, that evidence is going to be gone because it's going to be recorded over, or it's going to be biological evidence that's degraded in the hot sun. It just doesn't make sense.
A lot
I'm
doesn't
sorry.
make sense. I know. And someday, hopefully, we'll have a real candid conversation after hopefully somebody is in, because, you and I are being careful. We're being careful. I'm being careful
Well,
too.
there's one person I would truly love to hear from when this is all over, because you and I can sit here and talk about this from a distance, being on the outside, surmising things, guessing things, second guessing things. But I would really like to sit down with the lead detective and hear his perspective on things, hear his reasoning why things were done. Did somebody tell him not to do something, not to allow certain agencies or organizations to participate? Really, what was his mindset and why were things done from his perspective?
Yeah, they're always great. I'm actually rereading slowly the book that was written by the lead detective in the Ramsey case. And on Wednesday, actually, we're going to go through Patsy Ramsey's ransom note. Yes, I said it. It's written by Patsy Ramsey. It's a no-brainer. But I'm going to have somebody way smarter than me on to talk about that. And so.
Well, good luck with that. It sounds interesting.
Listen, Dale, I can't thank you enough. You spent way too much time with me. But I'm truly, truly appreciative. I try not to bother you too much with that. I really enjoy talking about so many other things with you, but I really appreciate you lending us your years of expertise in the homicide business to this case.
Oh, I think you actually really appreciated the recipe I sent you the other day. Who would have known that Italian food with potatoes actually tastes good?
One pan dandy. I'm going to text it to you because you like those easy. So the other night, everyone, so he cooks for his family and I cook for mine. And I'm slaving away doing veal piccata. Or sorry, I did chicken piccata, which I say slave away because there's so many parts to it. And it's not the easiest dish to make. Let's just put it that way. Meanwhile, what are you doing? Potatoes and what was the other? It was like Italian potatoes and meatballs, right?
Yes. But they actually tasted really good together. When my wife tried it, she said, "Oh no, you need to put this in the rotation."
Oh, it's in the rotation now.
Yep, it's going to be in the rotation.
That's when you know you have a winner. See, what's great is he has a food eater, right? Somebody who loves to eat food and will try lots of his dishes. And I have the same. And man, when you're a cook and you have somebody that can't wait for dinner to be done, like I've got all my boys at the counter going, it's great, including Simba. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to send you one pan dandy. For everybody in the audience, it's a 4-H dish that's very easy to make, but actually very yummy. And so Dale, thank you again. I really appreciate you.
Okay, Jennifer, it was good talking to you. You have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, you guys, he's one of my top fave detective on. He's so great. I feel like I need to shut up more when I have him on. Somehow I end up talking more with him, and I'm not sure. I think it's because I'm so familiar with him and have such a strong relationship that I end up jabbering, or maybe I just felt like jabbering a lot today. But he has so much to add and to impart to these investigations because he speaks from a lens that few have. Few are seasoned, decade-long homicide detectives that have that kind of a caseload, especially in a town like Dallas. Just a huge venue. So nevertheless, I just wanted to say I thank y'all for being here. He was great. We will definitely have him on again if he'll come on. I love that he wanted to weigh in on the Carmelo trial. If I would have known that he worked in Collin County, I only knew him from DPD in Dallas County. If I would have known he also worked there and worked with the prosecutor and the judge on that case, oh my gosh, I would have had him on when we were covering Carmelo's case. But I was glad he just happened to mention that offhandedly the other day, and at least give us some flavors to his opinions about the prosecutor and about the judge. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I know it was a bit of a long one today, but when you have somebody like Dale on, you want to grab every bit of knowledge and expertise you can from him. So what we have coming up tomorrow, which is Friday, we're going to be covering the Lindsay Clancy case. Again, Lindsay Clancy murdered her 3 children, strangling them with exercise bands. They were 5, 3, and 8 months old. The 5 and 3-year-old put up quite a struggle because the autopsy shows all their bruises and everything from the fight and struggle that went on. And the question is for the jury, not whether she did it, but the question is whether she was competent enough, whether she understood not only it's beyond the McNaughton rule in Massachusetts. Not only did they know right from wrong, but did they have the capacity to stop themselves, essentially. And so the defense is arguing she didn't, that she was out of her mind, that she was crazed with postpartum psychosis, which is different than postpartum depression, that she had voices speaking to her and everything. So we're going to really get into that with a psychologist, Dr. Eppright, PhD, trained at Dartmouth, has taught for years at Furman and University of South Carolina. I got a feeling we're going to be on completely different sides of the issue, which is fine with me. I want you as the audience to see both sides of every case and be able to make your own decisions and everything. So anyway, thanks again for being here. Until next time, may justice be served for Nancy Guthrie, for her family, and for all the missing.